Hello everyone, my name is Daniel, and today I would like to go through my latest blog post, read it, and provide some commentary as I do so. So today's topic is the practically indisputable case for 31 AD crucifixion of Yeshua. Now, this is going to be somewhat controversial in the sense that it is very popular to say that 30 AD was the crucifixion. And there are some consequences to 31 AD that I will get into in my next video. But I encourage you to hear the whole video out before you draw conclusions or before you write it off, because there are a lot of things that we must consider when searching for the true crucifixion date. All right, so I'm opening here with a picture of the eclipse I took from my backyard. It's very relevant to what people might have seen in the past, so we'll continue. All right. The life of Yeshua consists of some of the most significant moments in the history and timing of his birth, death, and resurrection. They are key to understanding prophecy, his appointed times, and his calendar. We are given a puzzle with hundreds of moving pieces that must fit perfectly together. With this information, we can determine with a high degree of confidence the most supported doctrines and the most likely times, appointed times of Yah, or Yehovah. In this post, I'm going to use information from Yeshua's life to confirm the Jordan River crossing in 1406 BC and the start of the Shemitah and Jubilee cycle. By doing this, the evidence of the Jordan River crossing also helps to confirm Yeshua's life timeline, including his sacrifice in 31 AD. Collectively, this evidence is relevant to our lives today because it points to the fall 2024 being the 70th Jubilee and the start of the Day of Yehovah. I've produced two prior videos, one about the 70 Jubilees, during which all of Jeremiah and all the book of Daniel will be fulfilled. And I also produced a video that documents how World War III will be nuclear, how the Bible describes the nukes, and the timing of the rapture. So all of that prior content hinged on knowing the dates of the Jordan River crossing, which in turn can be connected to the life of Yeshua. All right, so let's start with the critical evidence that links the Jordan River crossing to the ministry of Yeshua, because understanding this linking is critical for using evidence from one time period to nail down another time period, almost 1,440 years removed. Right, when is the Shemitah cycle? First, let's define what a Shemitah is. From Leviticus 25. Yehovah said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak unto the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to Yehovah. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year, the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to Yehovah. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the grapes of your unintended vines. The land is to have a year of rest." So that's the Sabbath year there. And then what happens on the Sabbath year? At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release that which he has lent to his neighbor, and he shall not exact it of his neighbor, his brother, for the Lord's release is proclaimed. Beware, lest there be a base thought in your minds or hearts, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release, is at hand. I omitted the part about people not being generous that year because people wouldn't have to repay during that year because it's the year of release. And if your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, that would make them a slave, and serves you for 6 years, then in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. Deuteronomy 15, 1 through 12. Then Moses commanded them, at the end of every 7 years, in the year for canceling debts, during the Feast of Tabernacles, when all of Israel comes before Jehovah, your Elohim, at the place he will choose, you shall read this law before them in their hearing. All right. So I've put together a brief timeline here that shows that they crossed the Jordan River in the spring of 1406 BC. So that's about 1/4 of the way into the year there. We know that this was a Jubilee year, or Jubilee 0, because that's when they came into the land, and this is when they started counting. So 1406 BC, and you count 6 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, makes this the 7th year. And we know that in the 7th year, the land rested from war. And we get that Joshua's 45th year is when they divided the land, and that's from the bad report from the spies. So if this is the year that's a rest, then that means 1408 into 1407 BC, Tabernacles 1408 to Tabernacles 1407. This is the Sabbath year. And so we've got 2 Sabbath years there and the Jubilee year all established. And now we just need to project these years, continue the cycle every 7 years, onto the time of Yeshua. So for now, we're going to assume that I have the 1406 BC crossing correct. I will provide evidence to support that at the end of this video. The key is to understand where the cycle begins so that we can understand what year Yeshua read Isaiah and declared the year of release. We know that Yeshua declared a Shemitah in the middle of his ministry, after his baptism and 40 days of testing and having time to grow in fame. Let's read what Luke has to say. Then Yeshua went back, full of and under the power of the Spirit, into Galilee, and the fame of him spread throughout the whole region round about. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read. And the scroll of Isaiah the prophet was handed to him. And he unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of Jehovah is upon me, because he anointed me to bring good news to the poor." This is forgiveness of their debts. He has sent me to proclaim release of the captives, releasing the slaves, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed. This is once again releasing the slaves, to proclaim the favorable year of Jehovah, the Shemitah year. And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of all the people in the synagogue were intently directed at him. And now he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Luke 4, 16 through 21. So, we know from Luke that Yeshua, when he read this scroll, he was declaring the Shemitah year, the year of the Lord's favor. Now, some people like to proclaim that Yeshua was declaring the Jubilee, but this is impossible given a 1406 BC Jordan crossing, because the nearest Jubilee dates would be 57 AD or 8 AD. What's interesting is it's entirely possible that the single story from Yeshua's youth fell on the Jubilee year, depending on how the Greek was translated. So it says, every year Yeshua's parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, or perhaps in his 12th year, they went up to the festival according to the custom. Now, this is just speculation on my part, but when I plot out Yeshua's life, I have his 12th year being the year of the Jubilee, which also could correspond closely to when he was 12 years old. So I'm not sure if that's significant anything, but that's interesting nonetheless. All right. We know the age at which a prophet or teacher could begin a ministry was 30. The fact that Luke doesn't say that Yeshua was 30 is a strong indication that Yeshua was near the end of his 29th year. Now, Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. Luke 3:23. All right. So here's a timeline I put together. It's got a lot of information on it, and I will be zooming into various parts of this as we go through. But I would like to show that I've got the 205th Sabbath year from the Jordan crossing, placed starting on 28 AD to 29 AD. This occurs after he had time to grow in fame. And I have him baptized here, which is in the summer of 27 AD, which I've got lined up with Tiberius's 15th year. We know that John started his ministry in the 15th year of Tiberius, and that Yeshua was baptized by him shortly thereafter. So this has Yeshua being about 29 years old when he was baptized. He grows in fame throughout the whole land for a year, and then he reads Tabernacles, the release of debts. He reads at the Feast of Tabernacles. That's what I'm speculating there based on the instructions in the text. The release of the debts, he sets the captives free and announces the year of Yehovah's favor from 28 to 29. And based on this timeline, this puts the Sabbath year perfectly centered in Yeshua's ministry. He's got a year and a half before. So 1 year before and about a year after. All right. So, using the Sabbath starting in 1408 BC, counting every 7 years, we come to the 205th Sabbath year, starting the fall of 28 AD through the fall of 29 AD. If this Sabbath cycle is correct, then we should be able to identify a reasonable interpretation for how Luke counted Tiberius' 15th year, during which John the Baptist started his ministry. It lines up with history, with the Jews starting their counting of years of foreign kings from the first of Nisan. After the start of their reign, this means that, so once a king comes to power, the next first of Nisan is the start of the first year of that king's reign for calendar purposes. This is because the prior king had already received credit for the year before. All right, so this means that there are two dates that the Jews could be referring to, Jews or Luke in this case. Spring of 13 AD or spring of 15 AD. Any given year cannot be referred to by two different rulers. So we have here is in 12 AD, Tiberius was made co-precept or co-ruler with the previous emperor because the previous emperor was getting old and couldn't do the job as well. But they were both reigning during this time. Now this occurred in October, which means the first Nisan after that is when you would start counting the first year of Tiberius. Now, we also know that Augustus dies in August of 19. So if you're not going to count the co-reigns, and you're going to count that still being Augustus, then that means that spring of 15 AD is where you would have to count the first year of Nisan. Now, I'm going to show later that even if you count the fall of 14 AD as the start, it causes problems. But let's just go and see what we have to say. All right. So this places Yeshua's baptism in the late summer of 27 AD, potentially on Shavuot or Pentecost. As you can see from this following timeline, if you start counting from the fall of 14 AD, which is the earliest possible date if you're not going to count the co-reign, then John's ministry cannot start until the Sabbath year. But we know that Yeshua had already been baptized and grown in fame by that time. So there's just no way with the 1406 crossing of the Jordan to use either of these dates as the 15th year of Tiberius. All right. This also means that we cannot move the 1406 Jordan crossing backward even 1 year. So if we move the Jordan backward, that means the Sabbath would be moved closer to Tiberius in his 15th year. Because there would not be enough time between his testing in the wilderness and his reading of Isaiah to grow in fame throughout the whole region. All right. And then we have another problem. Furthermore, we have the overturning of the money changers near Passover, 46 years into the temple construction to consider. So likewise, we cannot adopt a later date for Tiberius' 15th year for the same reason. If this 15th year moves later, then we would run out of this time to grow in fame, and we've got the temple, the money changers, which occurred right here, which is when the temple was 46 years in construction. I think I have another graphic down here. Yeah, here we go. The temple wasn't completed until around 64 AD. So these 46 years are from the start of the construction in the spring of 19 BC. Some people want to claim 20 BC, but that just makes the problem even worse for us. My research has shown that spring of 19 BC is what makes the most sense. They usually started construction in the spring, even if the person who ordered it took power in the fall. All right. So this event occurred after turning water into wine, after John baptized Yeshua. This means it occurred after the 15th year of Tiberius, which also started in the spring. So here we have the 15th year of Tiberius, the end of which lines up with the end of 46 years of building the temple. And we know that it was around Passover when we had the money changers, that he was driving them out. So all those things line up. If you were to move Tiberius 2 years forward, then you'd have to move the baptism forward, and then you'd have 48 years of the temple. It just does not work. So far, we have proven the Jubilee Year cannot be moved backward, but can it be moved forward? Right? To move it forward would put it from the fall of 29 AD to the fall of 30 AD. So we would be moving the Jubilee Year forward this way. And what would that mean? It would mean that there would be less than 6 months between Yeshua reading Isaiah and declaring the year of the Lord's favor, Jehovah's favor. Right? And that's found at the start of the book of Luke. And the popular 30 AD crucifixion date. So if you move it even further to closer to our time, then the 30 AD crucifixion date has to happen. Everything in the book of Luke has to happen in 6 months, and I do not believe that is possible. I haven't analyzed it, but I think there are enough travels and other events mentioned that would just completely rule out the possibility of everything from his declaring the year of the Lord's favor until his crucifixion occurring in 6 months. All right, so moving it 1 year forward would require a 31 AD or later crucifixion. to move it 2 years forward would completely eliminate 30 AD while creating the same problems for 31 AD of only having 6 months for everything to occur in Luke. So, because we know Yeshua's age when he was baptized, almost 30, we are constrained to push this meter forward by the circumstances of his birth, unless someone can prove his ministry extends beyond 3.5 years and can resolve some other issues that would be created by that. So it's just not possible to move this reading of Isaiah forward a year because it puts it too close to his crucifixion. And it would mean that the majority of his ministry, as documented by Luke, would have had to occur in one sentence of, and he grew in fame. All right. Let's talk about Yeshua's birth. Since we have identified many markers of his ministry, we can go back and confirm the timeline of his birth. The following chart shows when Yeshua would have had to be born given the constraints on the 15th year of Tiberius and the 46 years of building the temple. All right. So all these lines extend back, showing Yeshua's birth and John's birth and when they were in the womb. All right. Now, Josephus records a blood moon or a lunar eclipse occurring shortly before the death of Herod the Great. And there is only one blood moon that would be visible and noteworthy in Jerusalem, and that is on January 10th, 1 BC. Now, a lot of people are referring to other evidence where they think that it has to be this 4 BC eclipse. But you can see that when you bring up these eclipses, the 4 BC eclipse is it's a glancing eclipse that occurs over Spain and Portugal, and would not really be very noteworthy if they caught it at all, because the eclipse would be almost over by the time Israel saw it. And whereas the full blood moon on January 10th, 1 BC, is going right over Italy and Greece, and it's dead center. So there's a vast difference in how the moon would appear in the night sky. One would be noteworthy. One, Josephus doesn't document very many eclipses, so the fact that he documented the eclipse meant that it was pretty noteworthy. All right. So I'm not going to get into all the evidence, but we do know that Herod the Great dies on the Passover after this eclipse, and this gives 3 months during which a whole bunch of things that Josephus describes happening between the eclipse and his death to occur. There is all right. What we have here is, Herod killed all babies that were 2 years and under, so by inclusive counting, age 2, age 1, and under. It would cover this whole range, and depending on when he gave the order, it might all go back to John's birth. In any event, it's very clear that that 2-year window of time would fall right over Yeshua's birth. So there's a whole lot of other studies out there that will provide documentation for how we know that Herod was alive at this date and these things here, but these are the facts that I am presenting for now. All right. So if for some reason people decided it was this eclipse, it would have the effect of pushing Yeshua's birth way out to 6 or 7 BC. And then if we know that Yeshua was about 30 and John was just 6 months older, it means John would have been way older than that in Tiberius's 15th year. So we just know it's not possible to reconcile his 15th year with a birth out here at 7 or 6 BC. All right. So John gives us a clue that Yeshua was born on the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which would have him circumcised on the 8th day of the feast. And the Word, Yeshua, became flesh, human incarnate, and he tabernacled among us. And we actually saw his glory, such glory as his only begotten Son receives from his Father, full of grace and truth. John 1:14. So some translations say he dwelt among us, but the Greek word there is tabernacled. And that is a key clue of the time, because we're saying, right at the very beginning of John, just like Matthew, this is how the birth of Yeshua came about. He says, well, the Word became flesh on tabernacles. His birth date is right there in the very first chapter of John. The Feast of Tabernacles would also contribute to the problem of Joseph and Mary finding a place to stay, because everyone would be traveling toward Jerusalem. Furthermore, it means Yeshua would have fulfilled all the feast days during his first coming, because he was born in tabernacles and died on Passover. Holy Spirit came on Pentecost. So it's very, very consistent timeline once you understand his appointed times and his schedule for doing things. All right. It gets me thinking that maybe as some future Feast of Tabernacles will be his second coming, and we could all be reborn, raptured, on the very day Yeshua was actually born. It would be poetic, in my opinion. We shall see. All right, so let's talk about the covenant with the many and the end of sacrifices. There is a verse in Daniel that describes a period of time of 73.5 years in which Yeshua would strengthen the covenant and make a renewed covenant, aka make a renewed covenant, to the time that he put an end to the sacrifice and the oblation. Since we know the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, this interpretation of Daniel supports a 4 BC birth of Yeshua. All right, now, the common translation of Daniel 9:27 reads as follows: He shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. However, this was shown to me last week. If you look at the Hebrew, it could easily be read as something very different. Remember that the Hebrew reads from left to right. So Daniel 9:27, got he shall strengthen the covenant with many or with a multitude, the word for week, and 1.5, and then of week. So I like to double check my translations. So I put this phrase here into Google Translate, and it says it's 1.5 weeks. So we got 1.5 weeks, and then we've got this letter in front of week means the week, or it's like a definite article, or of the week. So I believe that this could be interpreted as the follows: He shall strengthen the covenant with many, or with a multitude, for 1 week of, for a week of 1.5 weeks. So a week of, which means 7 times 1.5 weeks, and then he shall stop the sacrifice and oblation, right, everything that was going on at the temple, because of the overspreading of abominations. He shall make it, the temple or Jerusalem, desolate. So I've done another video that goes into great detail on this about unsealing Daniel's text. So check that video out. I think I'll have a link here later. All right. So a week of 1.5 weeks is 73.5 years. It is widely accepted that the Second Temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av, which is the 5th month, in 70 AD. This length of time is exactly how long it is from the birth of John the Baptist to the destruction of the Second Temple, which caused the sacrifice and oblation to cease. So here's my chart. I've alluded the 70 years in the middle, so you can see from the 9th of Av, or the fall there, to the spring over here, that's 7.5 years. You get from John's birth, 6 months before Yeshua's birth. There, that's exactly 7 times 1.5 weeks, 73.5 years. So with this perspective and understanding of Daniel 9:27, we can have a much higher degree of confidence in the date of Yeshua's birth because it fits the prophetic timeline perfectly for starting the process of strengthening the covenant with John while Yeshua was in the womb. Right, this might even be the very time that Mary went to meet Elizabeth and John jumped in the womb. It might be the start of the strengthening of the covenant right there. All right. So by inclusive counting, we could round up to 74 years and capture the entire conception of Yeshua to the temple destruction. We can therefore conclude that evidence of the Shemitah year, starting in the fall of 28 AD, is consistent with John's 30th year and Tiberius's 15th year from his co-reign. And from this, we conclude that Yeshua was born in the fall of 4 BC, and that John the Baptist was born in the spring, 6 months earlier. Both must have been conceived in 5 BC. All right, let's talk about the sign of Jonah. The sign of Jonah referred to by Yeshua may be far more than Yeshua's death and resurrection on the 3rd day. Consider for a moment that Nineveh didn't see Jonah swallowed and spit up. The sign of Jonah was the message he brought to Nineveh. And Jonah began to enter the city, a day's journey, and he cried and said, "Yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown." Jonah 3:4. Yeshua repeatedly warned Jerusalem that the only sign or message it would get is the sign, message, or warning of Jonah. So the only sign Yeshua's generation, will be given is the sign of the prophet Jonah. The crowds got even bigger as he addressed them. This is an evil generation. It is asking for a sign. The only sign it will be given is the sign of Jonah. Luke 11:29. On Judgment Day, the men of Nineveh will appear against this generation, and they will be its condemnation, because they will condemn it. Because when Jonah preached, they repented. This implies that Yeshua's generation won't repent. Nineveh was spared. The Jews will not be spared because they will not repent. And look, there's someone greater than Jonah here, Yeshua. It is an evil and unfaithful generation, and the only sign it will be given is the sign of Jonah. Matthew 16:4. This is mentioned a lot in the Bible. All right, so the sign or message of Jonah was a warning that in 40 days Nineveh would be overthrown. Using the common day for a year pattern of prophecy, Yeshua was saying that in 40 years Jerusalem would be overthrown. All right, the death and resurrection of Yeshua wasn't a sign to the unrepentant. It was only a sign to those who believed and repented. Destruction is the sign to the unrepentant. We know that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. By inclusive counting, that would put Yeshua's death at 31 AD. The length of time from the spring of 31 AD until the fall of 70 AD is 39.5 years, which rounds up to 40 years. Now, if you start counting from the last time Yeshua warned before his death, then it might actually be a full 40 years. However, it's difficult to know the exact moment in Matthew 16 or Luke 11 when that took place, or if there were other undocumented times when he gave a warning. Nevertheless, 39.5 years by inclusive counting is 40 years. If Yeshua died in 30 AD, as is popularly believed, then it would be 41 years from his last warning, which would be the sign, until the fall of the temple. So here's the diagram here that shows the cross and 40 years, 40 inclusive years until the destruction. Now, my diagram was done to scale with 100 pixels per year. So this black bar represents a complete 40 years. That's why it goes a little bit past 70 AD, because I started it here. But you can easily see you could shift it over 3 months, and it would line up with 40 years precisely. All right. So here are some other fun facts about the significance of the number 33 in the Bible. The 33rd person in Yeshua's lineage from Adam is King David. And David ruled over all of Israel for 33 years. The 33rd time Abraham's name is used in the Bible is when Isaac, the child of promise, is born to Abraham when he is 33 times 3 years old. It seems like a lot of things happen in 33s. Given the sign of Jonah, we also have the following documents from Jewish history that confirm that for 40 years leading to the temple destruction, there were numerous miracles and bad omens in the temple. So the bad omens start, of course, when the veil is ripped from top to bottom at the crucifixion. The sages taught during the tenure of Simon, I'm not going to pronounce that last name, that the lot for Elohim always rose in the priest's right hand, the hand for Jehovah. After his death, after Simon's death, it occurred only occasionally. Sometimes it would be it'd be accepted, sometimes it wouldn't. But during the 40 years prior to the destruction of the second temple, the lot for Elohim did not arise in the high priest's right hand at all. So some people try to claim that this lot there were 40 days of atonement from Yeshua to the temple because the temple was destroyed before the 40th. However, there's nothing that says that this lot couldn't, the first of the 40 couldn't have been during Yeshua's day. After all, they were persecuting him and his followers that year. So too, the strip of crimson wool that was tied to the head of the goat that was sent to Azel did not turn white, and the westernmost lamp of the candle did not burn continually, and the doors of the sanctuary opened by themselves as a sign that they would soon be opened by enemies, until Rabban Yohanan scolded them and said, "And the doors of the sanctuary opened by themselves, as a sign that they would soon be open to enemies." Oh, I guess I copied that twice. He said to the sanctuary, "Sanctuary, sanctuary, why do you frighten yourself with these signs? I know about you that you will ultimately be destroyed. And Zechariah, son of Iddo, has already prophesied concerning you. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour your cedars." Zechariah 11:1. Lebanon being an appellation for the temple. I guess it was made out of cedars of Lebanon. So here we have in the Jews' own history that there were 40 years of temple oddities before the destruction, which confirms that the sign of Jonah that Yeshua was talking about was 40 years until destruction. All right, so given the tradition of inclusive counting, 40 years from 70 AD would be 31 AD and not 30 AD, as some like to claim. All right, I promised you that we'd get to when the Jordan was crossed, so let's firm up that so we can have a firm Shemitah year. The Shemitah years assume the Jordan River was crossed in 1406 BC. However, if the Jordan was crossed in 1405, 1407, or 1408, then we would get a different Shemitah year and throw all of the above calculations into chaos. The most straightforward way to prove the 1406 crossing is by utilizing 1 Kings 6:1. in the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of Jehovah. All right, if we can identify when Solomon started building the temple, then this verse tells us when they left Egypt. All right, so I have a link here. You can check out my blog on Medium if you really want to dive into this, but it establishes that 967 BC is the start of the construction of the first temple. It is widely supported by both biblical chronologically, sorry, I can't pronounce that word right now, and independent data preserved by classical antiquity. So there's evidence both inside the Bible and outside the Bible that confirm the date of 967 BC. Right, and I've put a chart here that shows the timing here from 967 BC is the 480th year by inclusive counting, in the 2nd month, and so we go backwards, right, and we get to the 1st month, the month of the Exodus. All right, so this is 480 inclusive years, takes you to 1406 BC is when they came out of Egypt. Now we know that there's 40 years in the desert, so from the time they leave Egypt till the time they enter the Promised Land is 40 years. And that takes you to 1406 BC. And of course, that establishes the Jubilee, and we know that the 70th Jubilee would therefore be 2024 AD to 2025 AD. So that's how all the timing lines up, and this is why it is very relevant to know when this crossing was. We can be pretty sure that the crossing wasn't earlier or before 1406, because that means we would already be in the 70th Jubilee. But, you know, as we saw before, you can't really move the Shemitah any direction during Yeshua's ministry without creating major problems, which means that this timeline has a high probability of being accurate. But just for confirmation, there's this documentary here that explains that the Pharaoh of Egypt was Amenhotep II, and he reigned from 1450 BC to 1425 BC. So because this video is more engaging than my blog, or this reading to my blog, I encourage you to watch it. The short summary is that Josephus, which is from the 1st century, Yeshua's time, provides direct quotes from Mathano, a Greek historian from the 3rd century BC, and he translated ancient Egyptian records that have been lost to history. All right. So from this, we know the Pharaoh's name was Amenhotep. But from this source alone, we don't know which Amenhotep it was, because there were several, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and so forth. So interestingly, this video also uses 1 Kings as one of several verses to identify which of the various Amenhoteps was Pharaoh. But it uses the date 966 instead of 967. I think it's, that difference there can be clarified by the link above. Nevertheless, we know from Yeshua's ministry that it has to be the one particular year for everything to work out. So I highly recommend watching the video to eliminate the possibility of Ramses being the Pharaoh of the Exodus. If you've seen the 10 Commandments video, popular culture likes to associate it with Ramses because they like to truncate the years of the period of the judges and other things. It just does not work out for it to be Ramses. All right. So this evidence narrows the potential years of the Jordan crossing to 1409 BC to 1385 BC, which is consistent with 1 Kings, because at least 1 year of Pharaoh's reign was before the Exodus during the plagues. Estimates of temple construction placed the Exodus in the 4th year of Pharaoh's reign. All right. So, if we move the Jordan crossing to 1407, then the 205th Sabbath would start at the end of Tiberius' 15th year. This would force the time between Yeshua's baptism and the reading of Isaiah to be under 2 months, 40 days of which would be in the desert. So there's not much time there in the last 10 days to grow in fame. So it'd also be inconsistent. I covered all that earlier. And since if we move it backward, then we'd already be in the 70th Jubilee. And since I believe the 70th Jubilee is the day of Yehovah, I would expect that there would be nukes falling and the rapture to have occurred. So since that hasn't happened yet, we have very high degree of confidence that it can't be moved backwards, unless I'm completely wrong about the 70 Jubilees. Check out my prior video about why I believe that Babylon the Great will be destroyed by nukes at the start of the tribulation, the beginning of sorrows. All right. So, since we can't go backwards, if we move forward, then the Sabbath year would be from 29 to 30. I covered earlier what would happen if you move it forward in either direction. It just does not work. It eliminates, go forward 1 year and 30 AD is eliminated. Go forward 2 years, 31 AD is eliminated because all of Luke has to occur in 6 months. And so what we can conclude from this is that we can't move it any further than 31 AD forward without it interfering with the sign of Jonah requirement for 40 years until destruction. We can't move any further backward because the sign of Jonah requirement for 40 years. All right, so it's safe to say that the Jordan crossing must have been 1406 BC or a multiple of 7 years later, because it isn't possible to move the Jordan back 7 years without leaving the reign of Pharaoh of Exodus. Given the confidence level in the dating of the construction of the first temple to 967 BC is so high, right, we have less than a year of error, there's no way to move the Jordan crossing from the 1406 date without messing up a whole lot of other references and data that we have. All right, let's move on to Daniel's 70th week. You're probably familiar with this prophecy, which points to Messiah. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, 80 and 2 weeks, and the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. Daniel 9:25. I'm going to propose a simple transformation of the Hebrew that more accurately reflects the use of masculine plural form of the word weeks. For a complete explanation, see my video Daniel 9 Unsealed and my blog post about this topic. All right, so here's the transformation. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem unto anointing the Prince shall be 7 groups of weeks after the 60th Jubilee, or the 60th group of weeks, a second group of weeks. So instead of 62, the 2 means a second group of weeks, because the word weeks is used 3 different times in plural, which means group of weeks. So we have 7 group of weeks, 60th group of weeks, and so forth. The plaza will be built again. It's going to be built a second time, right? So there's one order, and it's going to be built again a second time, even in troublesome times. So while the text doesn't tell us precisely the size of each group of weeks, I believe that the context and history leads us to the following. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem the first time, unto anointed prince shall be 7 70s. Right? So 70 is a group of sevens, right? It's 10 times 7. So that's 490 years. After the 60th Jubilee is a group of 49 years, and the Jubilee counts start from the Jordan River crossing. And a second 490 years. This is also a group of sevens. The plaza will be built again. This is the second time it's rebuilt. Right? It actually says again in the text. That's a hint that 2 should be second. And the moat, so both the plaza and the moat. And then the tribulation times. So you add all this up, and you get to Daniel's 70th week. The 70th Jubilee, and all of this clearly tells you the timeline of when things are going to happen. But for the purpose of understanding the time of Messiah, we know that the first command until the anointing of Messiah, you will have 7 70s or 490 years. Now, the unit of account here is weeks, so this should get you to the nearest week. So the 70th week is what we want to look at. So if watch my other video, and you'll see that there was indeed a second decree that was issued at the start of the 60th Jubilee, just as this interpretation predicts. And that decree specifically called out the plaza and moat. It's etched in the stones of the temple, so it's right there in front of all of our faces to see. However, even if you assume the traditional view that there will be 69 weeks until the anointing, you'll get the same result. Because 62 plus 7 is 69. So even the traditional view works, but I do think that this is a much, much better understanding of the prophecy and history. So Ezra left Babylon to rebuild in the spring of 457 BC. And the last week of the 490 years was from the spring of 27 AD until the spring of 34 AD. Remember, the unit of account was a week. So we need to look at that entire period. This places Yeshua's baptism and anointing in the first year of the last week of the group of weeks, and puts Yeshua's death precisely on the start of the 4th year of the last week. Just like his death marked the 4,000th year of the 7,000-year prophetic timeline. So here in yellow, I've included the 70th week, and you can see that his death is right there at the start of the 4th year, and you can see that he was baptized right there at the start, right in the middle of the first year of the last week. So, Daniel doesn't specify a resolution less than a week. It does eliminate any possibility of Yeshua starting his ministry before spring of 27 AD. And it lines up perfectly with the start of John's ministry and his crucifixion at the start of the 4th year. It's just kind of a poetic touch that I come to expect from Jehovah. He lines everything up with his feast days, and everything ends up fitting perfectly and symbolically. It's amazing how that happens. All right. Last but not least, we have the Chinese who kept detailed records of astrological events, such as eclipses. The following quotes were taken from these records, which document some very relevant information that aligns perfectly with Passover week in 31 AD. It reads, Yin and Yang have mistakenly switched. The sun and moon were eclipsed. The sins of all the people are now on one man. Pardon is proclaimed to all under heaven. The History of the Latter Han Dynasty, Volume 1, Chronicles of the Emperor Gongwu of the 7th year. In the day of Gui Hai, the last day of the third month, there was a solar eclipse. The emperor avoided the throne room, suspended all military activities, and did not handle official business for 5 days. Very significant eclipse that was. History of the Han Dynasty, also the 7th year. Then we have the eclipse on the day of Gui Hai. Man from heaven died. The Annals, number 18, Gui Hai. So these refer to Chinese year cycles as a 60-year cycle with naming of years. So all these things appear to have occurred the same year, although I'm not claiming to be an expert on their calendar. Chinese is not my forte. All right, so during the reign of Emperor Gongwu, on the day of Binying, on the 4th month, a halo rainbow encircled the sun. Right, and this is also mentions this time here. All right, so this looks like a circle rainbow encircling the sun. This was taken in my backyard on the day of the April 8th eclipse. And what I've shown here are 2 eclipses on left and right that occurred, according to NASA, in the years 30 and 31. And you'll see that the May 21st from 30 AD didn't even go over mainland China. And the one May 10th and 31 AD did go over China. But only this tip right here would have seen the full eclipse. Everybody else would have seen a partial eclipse because they would have been outside the path. So, it's not necessarily even a very good fit. All right, so I did a Google search for the reign of Emperor Gongwu, and it tells me that he reigned from 25 to 57 AD. And so we can place his 7th year by inclusive counting is 31 AD. Now he proclaimed himself to be emperor in the middle, but this was from his records. He would have counted his records earlier. So according to him, his 7th year would have been 31 AD. Because if you're declaring yourself to be emperor, it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. You're taking over the country. All right. So from the earliest records, the beginning of the year occurred at the new moon near the winter solstice. So the first new moon after the winter solstice in 30 AD was January 11th. So the winter solstice in 30 AD would be December 30 AD. So January 11th, 31 AD is when the first new moon would have been. And the third month would have been around April 10th. All right, I've included a list of all the eclipses recorded by NASA. And you'll see that there were, in the years from 31 and 30 and 32, there's one here in May 10th, 31, there's an eclipse, and that's the one I have listed up here. So this is an eclipse that they could have seen on May 10th. But May 10th is not in the third month. And so I've included all the other eclipses, which were total, right? So there's a period of totality. Those are measured over here in seconds. So here's some of the other ones from 22, 26, and 33 AD. I only included the ones in the spring. But as you can see, only in 26 AD did it actually go over mainland China. But even then, it's the wrong year. So you can kind of see where all these eclipses fell. It just doesn't seem to line up with the Chinese records. All right, so as you can see, it's the only one visible in China to occur in the 4th month. There are no eclipses recorded by NASA in the 3rd month of any year during the reign of Emperor Gongwu. This means that the darkness recorded by this record was likely the supernatural eclipse at the cross, regardless of any claims of mistranslation of the sins of all people are now on one man. Some people believe that the emperor was taking responsibility for the sins of all the people. So on one man means on the emperor, and that then the emperor was pardoning everyone because he considered himself to rule everything under heaven. That's the other interpretation of the text. But if there was indeed an eclipse on May 10th of 31 AD, and the records report that in the 3rd month there was an eclipse, that would be in April, not in May. So you can't have 2 eclipses month back to back. I've plotted the 6 years, the first 6 years of the Chinese emperor, and this is the 7th year. We know that the year started around the same time our years start, right? End of December, beginning of January. And so based on that, we know when the 3rd month was. They started their month on the crescent. The last day of the month was the dark moon. And there you have it. Man from heaven died to pardon sins for all in 31 AD. So these records strongly imply that we might know the exact day of the supernatural eclipse that came across the whole world, and we can prove it wasn't a natural eclipse. The April 10th, 31 AD appears to be the day of supernatural darkness on the true Passover. All right. All of that said, in spite of tremendous effort to understand the ancient calendar, I believe there's still room for some error in understanding these records. So if anyone else has better information, please add it to the comments. I'm just going to add a sidebar here that when it comes to the 3 hours of darkness, no one reported in history that there was an eclipse on a full moon. Now that would be the moon 180 degrees out of position, and the ancients knew the sun, moon, and stars very, very well. They knew when eclipses were possible, and so that would have been an extremely noteworthy event. But everyone that records or documents the eclipse of the Crucifixion only documents it as a really dark, long-lasting solar eclipse. And so that's a strong sign that Passover occurred on a dark moon instead of a full moon. There's some tremendous calendar implications by all this, which will be a future video. So, in this post, I have demonstrated via scripture, history, and science that Yeshua must have died in 31 AD and must have been born at Tabernacles in 4 BC. I might have used words that are a little stronger here. Extremely likely. If these dates were not true, then there would be a whole lot of inconsistent data that would have to be resolved. I've shown that the Shemitah cycle and Jubilee cycle must begin at the Jordan crossing in 1406 BC, and therefore we can trust that fall of 2024 AD is the 70th Jubilee and the day of Yehovah. That's the day we're supposed to dread, we're not supposed to long for, but it is also simultaneously the day of the rapture. Interesting times ahead. Sad for many, blessed for some. All right. So as I mentioned, the Chinese evidence and the lack of documentation of a dark day on a full moon strongly suggests that Nisan 14 falls on the dark moon, which would mean that the true Hebrew calendar might start on the full moon. So I produced a video blog that explored the possibility that the April 8th, 2024 eclipse was the true Passover. This is very different than the vast majority of people believe about the Jewish calendar, but nevertheless, I'm just going where the data takes me. We know that it was 31 AD based on all the data, or we have a very strong belief that it was because of the implications if it wasn't. All right. So I will produce a future video that will further explore the calendar implications of reaching this conclusion of 31 AD. So be sure to subscribe and follow me so that you can get that update when it comes out. In the meantime, you can see the last video I produced about is April 8th, the true Passover, and check out my understanding of Jeremiah's 70 years and Daniel's 77s as they relate to the 70 Jubilees until judgment. Thank you for watching and have a good day.